Moore for that very generous introduction. You can see he's my friend by the generosity of the introduction he's given. It's a great pleasure to be here, ladies and gentlemen, and a signal honor to be amongst friends and seniors. Khan Sahib is here, who preceded me at the old university, and Mrs. Khawar Mumtaz, who's probably one of the most distinguished social scientists in the region, is here, and it's a great pleasure to be with all of you. What I hope to do in this series of lectures, and today hopefully will be a very brief one because of the cricket match. I'll speak for 35 minutes. But what I hope to do is to examine the nature of the crisis of capitalism as a world social and economic system, and to see how this crisis is so deep that it's really a crisis of civilization, even more than a crisis of a particular social and economic system. Because as we'll see during the course of these lectures, the mode of production called capitalism, these days it's known as the market-based economic system, is associated with three important dimensions of culture and civilization. One is that it has brought into being a particular relationship between human beings, between humans and humans. Secondly, it's brought into being a particular relationship between human beings and commodities. And thirdly, it's brought into existence a particular relationship between human beings and nature. These relationships, which we take for granted under this system, were not there about 200 years ago. And it's interesting how the particular civilizational relationships, I should say, between human beings, between humans and nature, and between humans and commodities have been generated during the course of the 2 centuries that we've seen it in operation. And how we've come, in a sense, to the end of the kind of civilization that this particular historical, economic and social system has brought into existence. We may be on the threshold of a new civilization. But as the great scholar and Sufi master Martin Lings said, that while we may be on the threshold of a new civilization, that this may come at the cost of great destruction. There may be great destruction preceding the emergence of a new civilization. But regardless of what the future has in store for us, let's look at the present and see how it has been shaped by the processes of the past. Okay, let's very quickly try to identify the 3 obvious features of the contemporary world, which in a sense, and these are features which define the crisis of this civilization. The first and rather obvious one is that in spite of 2 centuries of historically unprecedented rates of per capita income growth, we still have persistent mass poverty. Something like 38% of the total population of the world is living below the poverty line, where poverty is defined in rather stark terms of $2 per person per day. Every 3.6 seconds, one person dies of starvation. So by the time we end this lecture, tragically, 900 people will have died of starvation. So it's peculiar that while a relatively small percentage of the world's population is living in at levels of luxury which would be unimaginable at the start of this particular economic system. Yet, amidst this atmosphere of plenty, this affluence, you have such a large proportion of the people who are hungry, and even a larger proportion deprived of the minimum conditions, of the minimum material conditions of civilized existence. Civilized existence or dignified existence in terms of access over safe drinking water, access over education, over health facilities, sanitation. And therefore, I think this fact of mass poverty in the face of plenty is an important feature of the crisis of the system. It's important because apparently the structure of the system, its institutional framework, doesn't appear to have the ability to overcome mass poverty within the foreseeable future, because it's persisted over 200 years. The second, again it's a more recent aspect of the crisis, is that the life support systems of the planet are under threat. By life support systems, I simply mean the quality of the air that we breathe, the quality of the water that we drink, the fertility of the soils through which food and other goods, agricultural goods are produced. These three aspects of the life support system of the planet, as you know, are held in a delicate balance within what we call an ecological system. Each is possible because of the other, in a sense. And the latest evidence, there are two major sort of pieces of work that have been done in the kind of audit of the life support services of the planet. The first, which was done a couple of years ago, was the Millennium Ecosystem Report. It's a 3-volume report. And the second major work that's been done in this area has been done by the Intergovernmental Panel for Climatic Change, the United Nations agency, which brought together something like 500 scientists and looked and set up data collection centers in 70,000 different locations across the world, and they collected data over a period of a decade. And these scientists have brought to bear cutting-edge science to come to rather disturbing conclusions about the state of the planet. We'll quickly discuss this, or discuss this at length if you like in the subsequent lectures. But the principal message of both the Millennium Ecosystem Report and indeed the Intergovernmental Panel for Climatic Change Fourth Assessment Report, incidentally, this has been described as the greatest scientific undertaking in human history. So, I mean, we have to take this as cutting-edge science. We can't just reject it on grounds that it's disturbing. What it says, the Millennium Ecosystem Report is saying that something like 20% of the eco-services may have been irrevocably damaged. By eco-services, they simply mean the quality of the soils, the quality of the air, and the quality of the water, both surface as well as groundwater. And by irrevocably damaged, it means that the next generation will inherit a planet where these services have deteriorated, possibly on a permanent basis. In terms of biodiversity, the evidence is even more disturbing, where something like 15% of the birds, population of birds is becoming extinct, and something like 38%, I think, if I'm not wrong, of the marine creatures have perished, have gone extinct. So it's not only that human beings have been placed into a state of peril, but other creatures who share this planet with us a large number of them have gone extinct. Now, somebody asked me some time ago, what does it matter if so many birds and so many animals and sea creatures are dying, so long as we're able to survive? And the answer, just to, in a very simple way, is we're living in this room, for example, and let's suppose that the roof is held up by beams. Let's say there's 6 beams across this roof that are holding them up, holding the roof up. And if somebody pulls down 2 of the 6 beams, the roof is not going to fall. But the room will become more fragile in the sense that it will be more vulnerable to exogenous shocks. So that is why we say that biodiversity, other creatures, are important for the functioning of life on Earth, because as they perish, it makes the entire ecosystem more vulnerable to external shock, exogenous shock. Okay, so the Intergovernmental Panel for Climatic Change, which is the more recent report done by the UN, the 4th assessment report. As I said, this is cutting edge science. We can't just poo-poo it on ground that it's worrying or disturbing. Tells us that 2 simple things. One, that there is a rise in the average temperature of the planet, global warming. And secondly, that this global warming is not part of some perennial climate cycles, but that this global warming is a direct result of the way human beings produce, consume, and dispose of their waste. So this global warming is directly related with the kind of social and economic system within which production is taking place and consumption is taking place. Now, when I was teaching this about 5 years ago, climate change and so on, people were a little surprised, but now the predictions are before us. The first prediction is that the intensity and frequency of extreme climatic events will increase. The intensity and frequency of extreme climatic events is going to increase. It is already increasing. So you'll have more hurricanes, more intense hurricanes. You'll have rains falling in places where they weren't falling before. In other places where they were falling, there'll be droughts. This, in the case of South Asia, has a more immediate consequence, in the sense that, as you know, 65% of the South Asian population lives on agriculture, and South Asian agriculture is critically dependent on the monsoons, the timeliness and quantum of rainfall of the monsoons. And the first consequence of global warming for South Asia is that the monsoon has become and will further become more variable. This variability has profound social and economic consequences for food production. But even worse, the second factor related with global warming is the direct impact on yields per acre due to the sensitivity of seeds, grain seeds, to temperature. The IPCC estimates that with a 2.5 degree centigrade increase in average temperatures over the next 3 decades, they expect a decline in yields per acre of as much as 30%, just by this factor alone. An absolute decline of 30% in the yields per acre of major grain crops due to global warming. Add to it the variability of the monsoons, and add to it the third factor that is upon us, and that is the water stress situation. The river flows in the Indus Basin have declined rather sharply, and now the total availability of water per person per year is down to 1300 cubic centimeters per person per year. The minimum that's been estimated as required for the functioning of normal human life is 1700 cubic centimeters per person per year. So already as we speak, we are living in a water stress region, country, because Pakistan uses 67% of the Indus water. The Indian case, at the moment they're all right as far as the Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna basin is concerned, but the projection is of the IPCC and others that by 2025 they will also get into a water stress situation, other things remaining the same. They'll be down to about 1,000 cubic centimeters per person per day. So that's the third aspect. The first, as I said, is the variability of the monsoon. The second, the direct effect of heat on seeds. And the third, of course, is the growing water shortages that are before us and are likely to worsen in the years ahead. Now this means that the world in general, but more particularly South Asia, is at a critical moment in its history, in that the political, social and economic system is likely to get destabilized under the stress of this climate change effect. And Dr. Pachauri has told us recently at a seminar where he gave a presentation that his latest estimate is that something like 500 million people in South Asia are going to be displaced over the next 3 decades due to climate change. We're going to publish that paper in a book we bring out on this subject. So the second dimension, if you like, of the crisis is that the life support systems of the planet are in peril. And more particularly the region of South Asia, which is home to 50% of the world's poor population, is probably in a more serious situation than any other region in the world. The third dimension, if you like, of this crisis, and now you might begin to see why I'm calling it a civilizational crisis, is that this economic and social system is associated with inculcating a particular relationship between one human being and another, between human beings, which is very different from the traditional relationship that we've seen over hundreds of years or thousands of years. And the social relationships under capitalism regard other people, let me put it this way, it systematically develops, as Erich Fromm has argued, it systematically develops aggressiveness. That's built into, and aggressiveness is sort of apotheosized, is elevated as a very positive feature by economists because it drives the market. The aggressive pursuit of acquisition, competition. So this aggressiveness towards other people is combined with greed, which of course is the other very positive feature that's celebrated by economists, because greed is what keeps the market functioning. Other people are seen not as means of experiencing ourselves, not as means of knowing ourselves, but as instruments through whom we can get ahead in the world. They're seen either as a means, instruments, or as a threat. Now, in this kind of relationship between human beings, clearly brutalization is, or barbarism would be a normal feature of the system. Violence, greed, and aggression would be a normal feature that's systematically inculcated by the market system itself. And as Mahatma Gandhi many years ago pointed out, there's enough in the world for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. Well, greed is what is institutionalized within the market system. And there's a book which the previous governor of the US Reserve Bank brought out, which was called Greed is Good, because he showed how greed keeps the system going. Well, now the chickens are coming home to roost, because this continuous increase in production, which is impelled by the impulse to make more and more profit as a means of survival, this continuous increase in production has intervened into the delicate balance, ecological balance of the earth, and that is why the IPCC is now coming out and telling us that the life support systems of the planet are under threat. Now the second civilizational aspect of this system, if you like, first, as I said, was the kind of interpersonal relationship that it inculcates, which is a break from tradition, if you like, because historically the other was seen as a means of fertilizing the self, as a means of knowing oneself. Shah Hussain said, "Teh milya mendi taazgi ho." In meeting you, I am replenished. The second feature is the relationship with commodities. Now historically, if you look at even the Western civilization, if you look at the Greeks, Aristotle, who wrote a very interesting sort of piece on the nature of value, he came to the conclusion, as you must have come across it at the old university, it's called Nicomachean Ethics. He writes that he wonders, about commodities and value. And he says, commodities cannot be of value because they're merely useful. What is of value is human functioning. That was the old view, that it is human beings and the functioning as human beings that's important, rather than commodities. Again, Shah Hussain articulated that traditional relationship by saying that lakh crore jina de judya, so bhi jhuri jhuri. Even those who have accumulated lakhs and crores, it's like dust. Or Bulle Shah saying, tan man dhan sab vekh liya, chuga phook ke apna sek liya. I discovered my being when I set to light my hut. So this relationship historically with commodities was a purely functional one. And human beings, the worth of human beings was measured not in terms of how much they owned, but in terms of how much they gave to other people. Well, we're in a very different world over the last 200 years. Now commodities have become the emblem of power, of status, of our worth. You can actually, economics has developed techniques through which you can work out the value of a human being in terms of the stream of earnings that he can generate. So this is a very different world over the last 200 years from the kind of world that Aristotle or Shah Hussain or Bulle Shah were talking about. And here what has happened is a peculiar inversion where qualities that human beings have possessed have been transposed into commodities. And we are being asked that if we are to repossess these qualities, we have to own those goods. So masculinity, which is an aspect of the male, or femaleness, female beauty, which is an organic aspect of the female, doesn't belong to them anymore. It's contained in the perfume. So we are told that this is a aftershave for masculine freshness. Or similarly in the case of female, that if you want to be beautiful, use this perfume. Motor cars, which are simply a means of taking you from A to B, have become the emblem of power, of style, of success. So therefore, objects in a sense have become, we are beginning to look at commodities as totems, as if they possess qualities of a metaphysical nature. Actually, they possess us, and we are asked to possess them in order to repossess ourselves. Now, this peculiar relationship between humans and commodities is the second civilizational dimension of the system, and is very powerful. As Marx back in the 19th century pointed out in his volume 1, that the capitalist system not merely produces goods that satisfy needs, it also produces the needs which these goods satisfy. So that is the new relationship we have with commodities. The third is the peculiar relationship with nature. Now, as you know, historically, and this is true, it will be found in almost all the major religions, that nature is, for example, in Hinduism, part of a sacred unity, where we are part of that sacred unity. Not a part, but we are part of that sacred unity. So the rivers, the oceans, the soils, the waters, the forests, the mountains are all part of this sacred unity, which gives us, on the one hand, the ability to function on the terrestrial planet, and on the other hand, is able to transport us to the transcendent. So nature enables us to have a simultaneous presence in this world and in the world beyond, in the transcendent world. That's the way Hinduism looked at it. In the case of Islam, the Quran very clearly says words to the effect that in describing nature, God says that these are signs for men who understand. So now what is signs? I've been looking at the meaning of sign and signature in this very interesting new Oxford University Press dictionary of English, where they trace the roots of words. Very interesting. And what it says is, the English word sign, very interesting, is associated with being blessed. And so signed and blessed him, the Old English. Sign also refers to attestation. It attests, it confirms. So the rivers, the oceans, the mountains, the forests, the deserts are confirmations of the presence of God. They're attestation. Signature. In a sense, one can say that nature is the signature of God, because signature means to indicate symbolically. So these are signs, these are symbols which provide us access to the transcendent. By experiencing the unique harmony and beauty of nature, we are able to experience the transcendent. And in so doing, we are able to know ourselves in a much deeper way than simply the ownership of commodities would allow. So now, but that's not the way nature is seen anymore. Over the last 200 years, as Khan Sahib will tell you, as we were taught in the old university, that nature is an exploitable resource. It's a resource that is to be exploited for production. Well, that's what's been happening, and that's what's happened over the last 200 years, and we now end up with the IPCC report telling us that we can't carry on like this anymore. Simply cannot carry on like this anymore, because we're destroying other species and we're about to destroy ourselves if we continue in this fashion. We're going to run out of clean water, we're going to run out of clean air. Our soils are going to become infertile, and God forbid any exogenous shock can cause a catastrophic collapse of the entire ecosystem. Okay, so now that, to conclude this first section of the discussion, is that there are three features in my view which define the crisis not just of capitalism but of civilization. The first is that an unacceptably large proportion of the world's population is living in grinding poverty in terms of hunger, and are actually dying of hunger in a situation where a small percentage of the population is living in unprecedented luxury. And the point is that as we have the time, and if you're interested, we can look at the structure of the system to show you how this tends to get worse and worse, not improve substantially over time. That's the way the system works. So this poverty is here to stay. It's been with us for about 250 years. Small improvements in poverty have taken place over the last 20 years, but mass poverty persists. The second feature is that because of the way this system is organized, for the moment I use that rather crude term, the way the system is organized, subsequent lectures will actually look at the dynamics of the system, how it actually does this, in terms of the principles on which the system is based. But crudely, the way the system is organized, it tends to produce more and more and reconstructs a human psyche that wants to consume more and more. Right? In the old economics that we were taught, there is the assumption of non-cessibility of the consumer. Unless the consumer has unless you make the non-cessibility assumption, the economics won't work. Right? Okay, so there is a non-cessibility of the human being as far as consumption is concerned, and you have a production system that in order to survive at the level of the firm has to produce more and more. So that's the one feature. The second, and so this the problem that the IPCC has brought to the fore, of course they've done it in rather neutral terms, right? They haven't told us why this has happened. What are the social economic forces that have brought this about? They're just giving us science that this planet is in peril. And if you continue to function in this way and produce in the way you're producing and consuming in the way you're consuming and disposing of your waste in the way you're disposing it off, then folks, you're not going to last very long. Right? The third dimension that I was pointing to, it is interesting that, you know, the system of knowledge and the kind of culture that we have created, as we've just described, does not position us very well to get out of this crisis. That's the problem, because historically, when human communities were faced with some natural threat to their existence, they would come together and use the values of sharing and caring, of empathy, of love, of working together, innovating together, finding solutions together. That's the way we've lived and survived from the old days. Well, in this system, the problem is that those institutions and those aspects of culture, as a friend of mine from Germany was telling me, what you're saying, mate, belongs to the museums in Europe. That's all in the museum now. That culture of sharing and caring, of working together, of being concerned with what's happening to other people, doesn't happen anymore. It's all in the museums. So if that is the situation at the cultural level, it's going to take a big leap, a big change in consciousness to start coming to grips with the crisis in a serious fashion. As I said, the longer term solution to the crisis can really only be found by changing the relationship between humans and nature, and between humans and commodities. These relationships that I just discussed with you, which belong to a tradition, and it's not just our tradition in the region that is today Pakistan or in South Asia. That's a tradition that you find in almost every region of the world, in every religion of the world. The idea that to know God, know yourself, and know yourself by knowing other people. That's old. The idea that nature is part of a sacred unity. It reproduces the material aspects of life and makes it possible for us to connect with the transcendent. That's their more. The idea that commodities, as Aristotle said, these are objects of convenience. Simply objects of convenience. They don't contain sexuality and power and beauty and status, efficacy. You've got to get out of that hypnotic trance. Well, that relationship between humans and nature, between humans and commodities, in other words, has to be, we have to recover that from our respective traditions, if you like, civilizational traditions. I don't know, I don't see at the moment the institutions and the organization and so on. I'm a little depressed at the moment, being an economist, because I don't see that. I brought this up at lunch and everybody, the faculty said, what are you talking about? This is not possible. You can't recover tradition anymore in this century. Well, I said, if you can't recover tradition in this century, you won't have a future. You can only reconstruct the future on the basis of recovering the past, because the present, we know from science, is untenable, simply untenable. Okay, I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Only, Dr. Can I just say something? The only positive development that I've seen, I come back from a corporate world. I was a number of positions in Pakistan Airlines, and I was pioneer of corporate social responsibility. Institutionally now there is a way countries and organizations are looking at that a certain percentage of this budget has got to be spent on things that you've talked about, improving the ecological culture, plantation of trees, etc. and also elimination of poverty and also looking at these. It's a very, very wide scope. And countries like France, for instance, they have developed into a law that every single organization must spend a certain budget, and the lack of profit is not an excuse anymore to avoid this particular thing. So if this चीज़ को आगे लेके चलना है ना, तो looking at talking to one of the provincial secretaries the other day when there was a fire incident in Karachi.
Yeah. Can you make the question brief because other people might want to ask?
What I'm trying to say is that these developments are taking place.
Sure. Thank you. What we'll do is to get other people to post questions, and if you don't mind, since we're short of time, cricket is on the way. I would just take a couple of minutes to formulate your question or comment, if you like, and then perhaps in the last 5 minutes I'll see if I can address them. I'm sure, like your point, many of the points that are going to be raised will become the raw material for the lectures that I hope to present, and show to you, to your satisfaction, that there are certain systemic tendencies which cannot be changed through, I wish they could, be changed through marginal tinkering of the kind that you mentioned. But we'll leave it for the moment. We'll have to put numbers on it, you see, that's the issue. So let's field a few more questions.
How can we revert back to the tradition?
Right, that's the second question. Very, very important. Okay, any other question?
One more. You mentioned about this ecological shock, any extraneous shock that we just upset GEO's coordination at the moment. what is in your mind when you say the sudden shock can simply destroy the planet? Or
Sure, we will. Yes, ma'am.
I feel, do you think it's as a whole, it's just in Pakistan, it's the psyche of people, do you think it's affected by capitalism, where people are so aggressive? I mean, the moral degeneracy in the country, do you think that is affected by capitalism?
Perhaps. Okay, we can feel that. 3 questions we got. Any more? और कोई सवाल? उर्दू में पूछ लें.
नेचर के अंदर भी कोई ऐसे इसके आपके सवालों के जवाब मौजूद हैं?
These are tough questions. Okay, let me see if I can address them.
Is there any other system which can replace capitalism? That's where we need to.
The 4th question.
That's where the world needs to.
if you wish.
Yeah, if you, let's give the gentleman a chance. आप कुछ पूछना चाहें? Okay. Okay, we've got 5 questions.
Just one more. When you talk about something better 200 years ago, I don't agree
sure.
with you. This kind of aggression was then barbarism. There was people who were being thrown to tigers and lions and these gladiators and nonsense. So what are you talking about 200 years? We are much more civilized today in many ways. I mean, people are dying, so okay, but have a heart.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm glad you posed this. Yeah, it's the heart that we have to take recourse to.
So the type of things that you talked about are very unimaginable now. In this area, where South Asia, where you pointed out, the issues are more
Immediate.
But the voices that are being raised are in the West. The debate and the dialogue or the criticism of capitalism is coming from there. Why is it total silence in this area?
In this area. I'm not sure whether criticism is coming from there, but anyway, we'll take that. Okay.
I just want to add another complication.
Please do.
Oh, sorry about that.
And that will be the last one.
Yeah. Okay. The fact that the Pakistan population in 1990 was 100 million. Today it is 200 million. So the world population similarly was 100 billion, say a billion, now 6 billion. It by itself, the nature of the beast is that resources would always be less than what the populace needs. So the disaster has to come. I mean, there is no, how can you...
That's the old Malthusian conception. Okay, fine. Let's see if we can, because these are all fertile questions, there is no definitive answer. I can only begin on a journey with you to see if we can make sense of the questions you posed, or at least delineate a framework within which an answer can be pursued. Okay. He's not here, so in that sense, am I permitted to? He's gone permanently.
By the way, Pakistan won the toss and elected the guy.
Right, so that's very I'll quickly end. The idea that you can set up rules, institutions, through which you provide incentives and disincentives to individual firms to spend a certain percentage of their profit on doing good things like sort of cleaning up rivers and so on. The question that it raises is, what is the volume of greenhouse gas emissions that are taking place? And to what extent will those greenhouse gas emissions be reduced if you incentivize or disincentivize individual firms to do good things at the margin? You see, there's a trade-off between investing in, let's say, greener technology. I raised this question with Mrs. Brundtland actually. I was part of the hearings of the Brundtland Commission report running in the old days in the 1980s. And the commissioners, I raised this question then, because this is what they were saying, what you just mentioned, the gentleman just mentioned, that we can make the system work, that we can bring in green technologies. The problem there is, of course, that the rate of growth ultimately depends on the rate of investment. And if investment is being done for purposes of profitability at the individual level, then if you set up a draconian regime where you say either you shift into a green technology made or you stop production, you're going to affect growth. That's the first point, right? Which is why the United States, which is the largest market-based economy in the world today, has not, as Mrs. Mumtaz will tell you, has not ratified the Kyoto Protocol, right, which is the old protocol, let alone the Copenhagen Protocol. There is a trade-off between growth and green technologies. Because if you, and one technical reason for that is, if you, from industry you will know that, is that firms at any one time have a stock of capital, stock of machines, right? Now if you tell them, you better start investing in green technologies, at the best that they will do is say, okay, for future machines we'll buy green machines, provided they are available at a cheap rate, which they may not be. But what the firms will not do is get rid of the entire capital stock and put in green stock. It simply doesn't make financial sense, as you know, if you're from industry. I mean, you increase the rate of depreciation in 1 year to 100%. There's no balance sheet that will survive. Got it? That's the problem. Your point, which I think is an important one, which eminent social scientists have also argued, like Friedman, that in the old days also there was violence. What are you guys talking about, you know? The problem with Friedman, and indeed your question, is the scale on which that violence was being conducted, right? Certainly there was barbarism. Women were being burnt at the stake, right? During battle, the Mongols would kill large numbers of people and put them up on spears. Sure, there was barbarism. But all that was being done by relatively simple weapons. So the numbers of people you could kill was constrained by the technology that you had. Well, what's happened in the 20th century, as you know, if you're in the corporate world, is that for the first time in human history, industrial technology and modern management systems which are being taught at various MBA schools, modern management systems and industrial technologies were systematically deployed to kill people. When Hitler built the gas chambers, he announced, it was all in the papers, they were calling for bids, and Siemens was one of the companies that made the bid and won the bid to build the gas chambers. They did a rather efficient job, because within a few months they killed something like 6 million people. Right? So 6 million people couldn't have been killed by the Mongols or by the African tribesmen. Right?
There were only 6
okay.
million.
Huh?
There were only probably 6 million in the whole world.
No, I'm talking about as a percentage of the population. Similarly, but the point is that for the first time you'll understand, it's common sense, that if the finest technologies that human beings have been able to produce, one thing you have to grant the system is that it's produced highly sophisticated technologies. If those sophisticated technologies and sophisticated management systems are deployed to kill people, you're going to make great progress in that direction, right? Okay, in a rather dramatic fashion. Stalin killed something like 20 million people within a relatively short period of time. Now 15 million people died in China. So the point is that the 20th century is, it's not as if there wasn't barbarism before, but this 20th century is marked by a kind of barbarism which was not imaginable in the for example, in the 12th century.
And we are much more conditioned.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very valid point.
With condition. Now, the other thing is precisely about the conditioning aspect, where he said that, you know, I mean, aggressiveness has been there even before. What are you talking about? Now, of course, there's aggression. There was aggression there before. The difference is that the ruling culture of the old world, across the world, talked of the importance of the community, of values of sharing and caring, of values of trying to benefit the other person, doing things together. Those were the ruling values, right? They went to war when they were threatened from outside, or they were violent with people who violated their particular norms, right? So, but in terms of the structure of that culture, it was inculcating a kind of humanity, right? What we have here, I mean, you need to read Eric Fromm's done the super job on this, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, in which he shows that in this particular culture, aggression is not an instrument of saving the community. Aggression is systematically inculcated as a way of life in the individual. That's the difference. That's what we mean by conditioning at the individual level. And if you have people like Greenspan saying that greed is good, and the dominant mainstream economics that's being taught at leading universities in the world, I won't say Cambridge, fortunately that's the only university that survived this onslaught, but people who come from Chicago and so on will tell you that competition is the basis of efficiency and growth and innovation. Competition is the basis of freedom, right? And that's what's taught. 99% of the literature that an undergraduate today is exposed to, even in a place like Chicago or Oxford, tells him this, that competition is one of the greatest institutions that the human community has discovered, because it unleashes creativity. So competition or aggressiveness is the means for society to progress. Okay, the third question, how do we change this? Now, that's a tough one. I don't have an answer. There are a lot of people across the world, and we're sitting in a place where people are trying to do this, is to create a counterculture, right? Which you can only do through intensive training and education within a relatively small group, of building of enabling people to remember themselves as they were, to go back into what today is a mere dream. This friend of mine, very good, he's a professor at a German university who wrote a PhD thesis on the automobile. And when I told him, I said, he got to recover the old values. And he said, they're not there anymore. In Europe, they're all in the museum, because they've lost contact with their folk tradition. Fortunately, in Pakistan and South Asia, we still have that contact with the folk tradition. When somebody says, like Najm Hussain says, "Kyun aunda hai nig hangara manuan akhida," and then saying, "Dhood bukaliyan jhokan vichon kyun aunda hai nig hangara manuan akhida." Why do I feel a resonance of possibilities in those little hamlets covered by dust? That poetry, that folklore, this literature, which happens to be Sufi literature, still has resonance with our people. It's part of the rhythms of their lives. When they dance, when they sing, when they meet each other in repose, it's possible to reach out to those people. So perhaps small islands, as you were saying, small islands, people can try them out. I don't know what future that has, but that's the only thing we can do, I suppose. I don't know. But in terms of an alternative system, you see, capitalism has a great capacity. One of the reasons why it survived so long is its capacity to adapt, to modify itself. The gentleman just told us the rules. Tell the company that jitna invest kar do. It can adapt itself relatively quickly, right? And that may be the reason why it survived. Now, who knows, if there's a sufficient counterculture that's built up, who knows what kind of changes they may be able to bring about in the forms of production, in the modes of distribution, in the forms of urban living, the way we dispose of our waste. We have sitting here a great architect, Kamil Mumtaz. It's an honor to be here, sir, with you, who's thinking of an alternative vision of the city of Lahore. People can do that. There's nothing to stop him from doing it.
So if somebody brings simplicity in both,
Huh?
so if somebody brings simplicity in both, like simplicity becomes fashion, and people start looking
Right.
at it as something superior, and
Right.
in that way I think we can revert back to
I think you have to catch the imagination of the younger generation who have to now fuel the change.
That's right. It's a great challenge, building these small islands. I think the thing is to focus on this. What are you going through in building Hast-o-Neest? What kind of responses are you getting? How do people change when they come here? What is the resistance that's offered? What constrains you from reaching a bigger scale? These are questions. What is required to reproduce things like Hast-o-Neest? Maybe you don't want to go to a big scale. Maybe you want to produce 1,000 Hast-o-Neests elsewhere, all independent. What kind of institutional mechanism do you need for that?
So if you allow me, I also want to highlight this social aspect of capitalism. My brother has a very valid idea that thus nature has inbred subsystems
Right.
for the fraction.
That's very
So I
important.
agree, nature does, because nature has the power to punish the enemy. One of the sociological subsystems which I have studied on capitalism is that the advanced industrialized nations, they have suffered the low infertility rates. Now they have their population, the structure of their population has been deformed. You know better, sir, that Germany, Italy, France, UK, China, Russia, even if you allow, the list can be longer, but their population structures have secured and they don't have the children now. The societies are suffering from the aging problem because they put the women.
I think it's a very, very important point. I need to link this actually with another thing that was raised here. See, are there any demographers here? Maybe they can give us a bit of data. You're a demographer. Now, you would know that fertility rates decline as per capita incomes increase, and the participation of women in the labor force increases. Fertility rates decline for a variety of reasons that are also sociological in nature, because the family wants to have a high level of consumption, so they want to keep it small. So fertility rates decline because of that. But once fertility rates decline, you're going to have a change in the age composition of the population, where older people become a larger proportion of the total population. Now that's what's happened in the West. What very few people have pointed out is the implication of this is that productivity has to increase, because the number of, the number of older people has shot up as a percentage of the population. So those people who are younger and who are working have to have a very high, the productivity growth rate must be very, very high, right? And that is what's going to prevent you from doing the kind of good things that were mentioned, of getting firms to, start introducing green technologies, because firms as well as the system as a whole, the country as a whole is under pressure to raise productivity, man, because you have a demographic situation here, where a large number of old people have to be looked after by a small number of young people. So they better be productive, right? It's not going to be very popular if you tell firms increase the depreciation rates by to 100%, because we want the planet to survive. Not going to happen. Okay. Now the other thing is about this point about destructiveness. और ये पहले भी होता था, लोग मारते थे एक दूसरे को, भाई मारते तो थे, but आप फर्क देखें ना कि the kind of barbarism that you observed in the 20th century and unfortunately are continuing to observe today, as I said, involved a conscious deployment of industrial technology and management, modern management systems, simply to kill people who were completely innocent otherwise. Right? There was no law or legal or judicial process through which they decided that the Jews have to be eliminated. Right? Similar thing happened with respect to the atom bomb. Now, the logic of the atom bomb, right, when the atom was discovered, the logic of the atom bomb was that it's going to save lives. It's going to become a deterrent. And so when the Americans dropped the atom bombs over Nagasaki and Hiroshima, you still see that they continue to argue that stopped the war. And if the war had continued, many more people would have died. I mean, that's an amazing logic, but that's the argument. So but the point is that there is a technology now available which at the press of a button can wipe out entire cities. And if you look at the number of, if there are a number of countries who possess nuclear capability, including Pakistan and India. And it's been estimated that, if we use all the weapons that Pakistan has, and if India uses all the weapons that India has, most of the population of South Asia, in addition to most of the species, will be wiped out. But even in a limited nuclear war, where there is a single exchange, not a second exchange, a single exchange, Rand Corporation has estimated that 25 million people will die immediately, and many more millions of people will wish that they were dead. They will be so sick. So the point is that these technologies that are now available and are part of the narrative of national security,
and the kind of funds that are diverted,
and the funds that are diverted to, exactly. I did a few numbers on this once. What is the cost of a submarine in terms of the number of schools you can build? It's terrible. But the point is that we already have stockpiles of these weapons which are being constantly upgraded in terms of their destructive power. And these weapons are part of a national narrative, peculiarly enough, of security.
we can't exist without.
Right? A friend of mine calculated, he's a physicist, Delhi mein rehta hai. He did a probability estimate and he said, he's a nuclear physicist, but a university kind of guy. He's not a. And he said, the probability of a South Asian citizen dying from a nuclear war is higher than the probability of dying in a road accident. There are not enough cars here at the moment.
What about the probability of dying of hunger instead?
Yeah, but that's an even higher one. As I said, 3.6. We have 3.6 people dying every second. So that's a fact. But the point I'm trying to make is this business of saying that now we're not barbaric. Simply because we develop technologies doesn't mean that we're less barbaric. We are more barbaric because we're using those technologies in a systematic way, and not only using those technologies in a systematic way, but building national narratives which require you to build weapons of mass destruction. I think it's a very different world from the old world, and because they could take recourse to a culture. Sure, they were brutal in war, but they could take recourse to a culture that pointed them towards a sense of beauty, of truth, of love, of togetherness, of the community working for each other. That was a living tradition that they could go back to at the end of all the nasty things they did to each other, I suppose. But we don't have that recourse, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saab. It's been very thought-provoking and enriching, and we hope it will start off a discussion, a very rich discussion. It's been amazing hearing you speak. Thank you very much, and thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Don't get me into trouble.
आप मेल